Hello, everyone. I hope that all of you are connected now. So I will waiting for the next 1 minute and start the meeting.
Good morning.
Hello, Sophie.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Chala.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
So I think that all are connected. Very welcome to everyone. And I think that we can start this meeting today. So I will start first. Dear colleagues from EPF, dear experts and speakers, dear MEPs and other participants, let me first and foremost express my gratitude for the possibility to co-host this event and the fact that we have the Abortion Atlas coming out today on International Safe Abortion Day. On behalf of me and my fellow MEP colleague Sophie, who will take over the moderation of the event in a few moments, and our experts from EPF and IPPF, I wish you a warm welcome to our webinar today, and hopefully it will be an interesting and fruitful one. As it is the International Day of Safe Abortion, I will also use this opportunity not to congratulate, but rather to start out by putting out a call for action marking this day, a joint action of us all in creating a society where no woman will be left behind in her right to healthcare, and all European citizens will have access to safe and legal abortion in their countries. As the EP reporter on sexual and reproductive health and rights and the author of the resolution on SRHR, which was adopted in June this year, I cannot emphasize enough how much the tools such as Contraception Atlas and now the Abortion Atlas speed up our work and give us a unique overview. When I say overview, I mean a state of play on where we are and whom we should be watching more closely, while also having the information on who should be highlighted as examples of good practice. This Abortion Atlas, which is being published for the first time, is an interactive map which allows us to score 53 countries and their success or lack thereof in ensuring access to safe and legal abortion. The results we'll be discussing today show that we truly have our work cut out for us. The Atlas sheds light on the fact that a number of countries in Europe still classify abortion as a crime, and there are a lot of unnecessary obstacles in assessing it even where it is legal. This was also visible in our work on the new resolution on SRHR, and we faced many attacks, backlash, and intimidation, with most of them being rooted in the anti-abortion position and focusing exclusively on abortion. That shows us all we have achieved is far from the beginning being enough. While our experts today will share more details on the actual data in the Abortion Atlas, I once more want to emphasize my gratitude to all those who are working on this and express my open call to all of you. Let's use this data, as well as other which are at our disposal, to form a broad coalition of experts, civil sectors, politics, academia, and proactively creative a narrative in this issue. To only respond to attacks and backsliding is no longer an option. To those who stumped over women's rights, which is also painfully visible in the Abortion Atlas data, we have to make clear that they are no longer the ones leading the discussion. It will be us shaping the future in this issue, and we will be firm, loud, and clear on this. Safe and legal abortion anchored in healthcare is our goal, and we will not back down. And now I will give the floor to our colleague Sophie, who will continue lead this meeting. Dear Sophie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred, for kicking off this very important and very topical event. Just, I think 10 days ago or so, there was a conference on demography and the family. And as you can imagine, it was attended by conservative, pot-bellied men deciding over the bodies and lives of women. And this is a trend. I'm really very interested to see the atlas, and I hope that maybe my gut feeling is wrong, but I can see that the right to safe and legal abortion is under pressure in many parts of the world. Just recently, even the Chinese government announced that they want to outlaw abortion because women have to basically make babies. Women are just a tool for policies. It's pretty disgusting. You have the feeling that you're thrown back in time, decades, if not centuries. And it's becoming more and more difficult for women, and the whole climate is changing. Women are feeling more guilty. We can see that because there are conservative governments, conservative politicians, religious leaders dominating the debate, you can see that also the attitudes of young people are changing, and that we are going back in time. So I think we have to be incredibly assertive in curbing this trend, speaking out and defending what has been achieved so far, and making sure that all women have access to safe and legal abortion. And I know from my own experience, it can make every difference. It can make every difference. Every woman in the world should have the right to a safe and legal abortion. It's essential for your health and for running your life autonomously. So I'm very, very grateful for the people who have done this work, who have prepared the European Abortion Policies Atlas. I think it will be very, confronting us with some very unpleasant and alarming truths. Before we are going to the animation, I'm first going to give the floor to Neil Data, who hardly needs an introduction. He's the EPF secretary, and then after him, Caroline Hickson, the IPPF regional director. And after them, we are going to go to the animation. But first, we'll listen to Neil and then to Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie. And also, just allow me to say a few words to say what a pleasure it is to be here again with you, and also with Fred on International Safe Abortion Day, and to be able to present to you the result of what has been a long piece of work between ourselves and IPPF European Network to analyze the abortion laws and policies of over 50 countries and territories in Europe. So it's really a pleasure to be here. We have a presentation which I'll ask my colleagues to pull up. But basically, the idea behind this was to take a much closer look at abortion laws and policies in the European continent, and to see how they were doing in comparison with each other, and to what extent women's rights were guaranteed. And so we've been analyzing these laws for almost 18 months now, I would say, and this is what I'll be able to present to you now. So it's for those of you who know our other atlases on contraception and cervical cancer prevention, you'll understand the concept. So okay, I see that the presentation is up now. Next slide. Okay, great. So just a quick grounding in what do we mean by a policy atlas. So this is a comparative map that scores over 50 European countries and territories. And we also looked at certain territories because even if they're not independent, because those territories legislate on how women living on that territory actually access abortion. So we thought we needed to take a look at that as well. And we take a look specifically at 4 overall criteria, and then a very intricate mix of 15 sub-criteria. And now the 4 criteria are the legal status of abortion, where, what is the main law regulating abortion, abortion care. Then we take a look at what we've called broadly access. So this includes time limits, medical procedures, some of them may be unnecessary, and to what extent does it fit within the national health system. Then we take a look at clinical care and service delivery. So what methods of abortion are available when women request it. And then finally, information and online information. This again, keeping in mind that governments have a responsibility to inform their citizens about what is available within national health systems. In order to do this, we constituted a very eminent multi-stakeholder group of experts that provided guidance throughout the process. And you'll, a number of them are on this webinar with us, and you'll hear from one of them later on after the animation. And then the main sources for this come directly from the World Health Organization, which has a legal database of abortion laws, and then complemented by very valuable information from IPPF European Network from its member associations all across the European continent. And also just to point out something very obvious, the information we'll be providing you here does not reflect abortion rates per country. The numbers we'll be providing are a distillation of all these different 4 criteria. Next slide. So here we take a look very quickly at the expert group. So we can see here that we have experts from a whole range of different fields who bring together legal expertise, medical expertise, the world of academia, politics, the perspectives of actual practitioners, international standards from WHO. We'll be hearing from our colleague from WHO later on, young people, and the project was led by ourselves and IPPF European Network, and we'll be hearing from IPPF a bit later. Next slide. Now, first, just a little bit on research limitations, so that we don't go into this into the atlas with preconceived notions. So first, what we saw is that there is a discrepancy in many countries between the legal situation and the situation as women experience it in many countries. So this is the the difference between de jure and de facto. Another limitation we need to come to consider is that the laws in many cases can be unclear, so that there's gestational limits in every law, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, but it's not clear what is the starting point of those weeks in some cases. There can be criminal penalties which are dissuasive. Then also there's limitations in terms of understanding access. There's a big divide between rural and urban, the protocols women need to go through in order to actually access abortion, etc. So just bear in mind certain limitations of this atlas. Next slide. A little bit on international standards and guidance. So even though abortion in the European region and within the EU is a matter of member state competence, there are international guidance and standards that we need to take into account. So here I won't read them out, but I'll just reference them. There's guidance, very clear guidance from WHO. There's also indications, guidance coming from the European Parliament, from the Matic report, whose author is here with us today. Also, the Council of Europe has also provided its own statements on what member states should be doing in reference to access to abortion. Next slide. So here we have the atlas. Okay, so we can take a couple of seconds to take a look at this. You can see here how the countries fare in terms of making abortion accessible to women on their territory. So there's 6 main categories. So you have the very good countries in dark green, and so we'll be going a bit further into those ones, which score 85 or above. Then you have the good countries, which are in lighter green. So there you have France, Spain, Norway, Finland, etc. Then you have a big category in yellow, where these are just the average countries. One of the experts, and I'd like to quote her or paraphrase her here, said that basically Europe has a lot of medium lousy laws in terms of abortion. And you can see these medium lousy laws in the yellow and orange categories. Then we start coming into problems when we have, when we reach the red category of Hungary, Slovakia, Turkey. And then unfortunately, we have very bad countries such as Poland. And then there's a number of other ones, but they're too small to be seen on the map. So such as Liechtenstein, Andorra, etc. I mean, we'll be going into those as well a bit. So you can see the patchwork of countries that we have here. So it brings a new dimension to understanding this. Next slide. So here, the main findings, so we can see here going from very good, women have access to abortion more or less as they wish. I mean, there's always limitations to this, but it's more or less there. And there you have 4 countries. Then you have good countries where women have broad access with rather limited obstacles. There you have a certain number of other countries there, France, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, etc. Basically, one common feature of the very good and the good countries is that they have all been, or most of them have been looking at their abortion laws recently. So they've been adapting the laws as the years go by. Then you fall into the medium and poor countries. And these countries are where you have abortion laws, which are essentially quite outdated. So they haven't been looked at more or less since the 1970s or 80s in most cases. Then we get into the really problematic countries of very poor and exceptionally poor, where there we can see that very often there have been new restrictions imposed relatively recently, or there's very low gestational limits. Next slide. So here we have, we take a look first at the very good countries. So Iceland, Netherlands, Sweden, and Great Britain. And here we have to separate Great Britain because the little bit of Northern Ireland has a different legislative framework. So some common trends that we have for the very good countries is that we have progressive laws, which are standalone. They're not part of the criminal code. Access is widely available up until relatively late time limits. Social and economic reasons also allow for greater access to abortion, and there's generally full coverage under the national health systems. Under clinical care, you have surgical and medical abortion that are both available, and in some cases, there's the possibility for women to self-manage their medical abortion. And then also there's refusal of care, which is not allowed, so that doctors are not able to deny access to abortion based on personal belief or convictions. And then also, finally, importantly, there's very good online information provided by the government, which is useful to women. And also in a number of cases, the governments take actions to counter the disinformation that is out there about abortion, abortion services. Next slide. And then, yes, next slide. Okay, and then here I hand over to my colleague Caroline Hickson, who will take us through the main findings and the recommendations. So Caroline, over to you. Okay. No, before I hand over to Caroline, we were missing one slide. Here it is back. So we took a look at the good countries. Now we'll take a look at the very bad countries. So this we see is mainly the microstates plus Poland. Some common features that we have there for these countries is that the legal situation makes it so that abortion falls within the penal code with strict penalties. Access to actual abortion care is highly restricted, if not outright unavailable on the territory of the country. Clinical care, since it's illegal, clinical care doesn't really exist, except in some cases where abortion may be required to save a woman's life. And of course, there's no online information. And in some cases, we have proactive measures by the governments going against abortion rights. And that's certainly the case of Poland and also some other countries. But now I'll hand over to Caroline, who I see is online, who will take us through the main findings. So over to you, Caroline.
Okay, thanks a lot, Neil. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. It was just to show you how we went about the methodology. So for each area of the research, we scored countries according to 5 different colors, and then the total scoring brought them into their final place in the atlas. This is available. So if you want to go into the detail of where each country fell in each category, it is there for you to have a look at. But if we could skip through these few slides and go on to the findings slide. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Thank you so much. So I think the first thing is, when you look at the first one, we ask, are we living in the 19th century or are we living in the 21st century in Europe? Because we still have 14 countries where abortion is technically a crime, and that's either criminalizing the woman directly and or criminalizing the provider. And we might say that in many of those countries, possibly those penalties are not carried through. But I would say, if you look at what's going on in the States, would we ever have thought 10 or 15 years ago that what was going on in Texas would be happening? So as long as that is in the law, we are in danger. Women are in danger. Providers are in danger. And it's quite shocking to see how many countries that is still the case. And even if women are not considered criminals, we're certainly considered as less than capable of making our own personal and private decisions about our own personal and private healthcare needs. A multiplicity of different barriers are thrown up in front of women who are seeking abortion care. Forced waiting periods, mandatory counseling, third-party approvals. And what particularly matters is perhaps when you put all those barriers together, you're talking about time-sensitive, urgent healthcare, and you are extending the period before a woman can access an abortion that she needs. In Italy, for example, it can take up to 3 weeks to secure the necessary appointments to see a counsellor, and for the medical units to file all the requirements necessary. I mean, where you have limited greater limits, in Portugal, for example, where the limit is 10 weeks, the scope that a woman has to act between the time where she might know she's pregnant and the time she has to decide to have an abortion might be as little as 2 weeks when you put all these barriers together. So timing is an incredibly important part of abortion healthcare, and these barriers need to be dismantled. And we know also that in certain countries like Hungary and Russia, things like mandatory counseling are in fact efforts to manipulate women away from their own knowledge and choice of what is best for them in their particular circumstances. We also have the issue of cost. So in 21 of the countries only, abortion is covered like any other medical service. In other countries, women have to pay. And of course, that means, can you just go back to the slide? I think there's a mistake. Yeah, thanks. So of course, inevitably, where cost is involved, that is going to discriminate against the poorest and the most vulnerable women. And we know that women like the Roma women are disproportionately affected by lack of access, also undocumented migrants, refugees. So those people who need society's care the most are again most discriminated when it comes to their reproductive health care. And we simply measured whether it was covered by national insurance or not. It's too complicated to measure the entire area of costs, but we also know there's all sorts of other costs involved. So even when national insurance covers it, women might be forced to pay for unnecessary ultrasounds, or because of the waiting periods, they might have to travel to get a particular counseling session. They might have to have additional childcare while they're away. So the time delay is greater. They might then need a more expensive, more complex procedure at the end of it, more expensive again. And so you're creating a vicious circle. And again, the heaviest burden on those who can least afford it, who can least manage it. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So medical abortion, so far only 38 countries provide medical abortion. Something we didn't measure, but which is also very interesting, is the whole area of choice. Because while some countries like Ireland are incredibly strong in providing medical abortion, and particularly home and self-care, that in itself can also have challenges for women, women who perhaps are not well situated to have an abortion at home, particularly, and that again can be migrant women, refugee women, women in violent partnerships, even students who are living in flats together. So I think the whole issue of choice of method of abortion is really important, but also the fact that a large number of countries still don't have any medical abortion is quite significant. Only 3 countries protect women from being harassed or attacked when accessing abortion clinics. And one would think that that should be a fairly simple law to implement, that you cannot attack and harass a woman for seeking healthcare. In Ireland, again, which is one of the countries I know best, abortions are carried out in the National Maternity Hospital, amongst others. And there, it's not only the women who are accessing abortion care that are affected, but women who were going into the hospital with miscarriages were being attacked and shouted at. So there is just literally no excuse why that is allowed to happen in Europe, and why only 3 countries protect women against this. Refusal of care, we know what a problem this is in so many countries, particularly in Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and we know how those who oppose reproductive freedom really cynically manipulate this to prevent women accessing abortion. We know in the south of Italy, for example, we have maybe over 80% of doctors who refuse to perform abortions, supported by the institutional settings of hospitals closely connected to the Catholic Church and to the patriarchal powers that be. And even in this, we were only able to measure denial of care as it lay in the law. We also know anecdotally that in many, many places, individual health providers will turn women away. The huge issue of stigma and how that affects women, that is very difficult to measure. So these are all things which prevent women and harm women in Europe. We have, of course, the great opportunity now of online information. So to make it easier for all women who have access to online portals to get information. And we have some examples, really excellent examples of governments who provide superb information, and some are even really proactively combating disinformation, like in France, and that becomes more and more important as we see the lies that are thrown up by those who would oppose reproductive freedom and safety. So obviously that's a really quick snapshot, and it's so much depth in the findings. But I hope I've given you a quick snapshot, and then quickly on to the conclusions, if I can have the next slide. And I think our conclusions align with our recommendations are aligned with many recommendations that are those fighting for reproductive freedom have put forward today on this day. We need to modernize abortion laws in Europe. We can't continue to live in the 19th century. Abortion must be decriminalized everywhere, and time limits need to be extended. Abortion needs to be on the indication of the woman in consultation when needed with her healthcare provider. It is nobody else's business. We need to ensure that abortion care is covered by national health systems or national insurance or whatever the system of medical care is. Cost should not be a barrier because it is going to affect the marginalized most disproportionately. We need to get rid of all these unnecessary obstacles. We are grown-ups, we know our own minds, and these we know are just put up to make abortion care more difficult and more traumatic for women, and we don't need that. So we need to really fight to remove all these unnecessary obstacles. We need to ensure that providers are prohibited from legally opting out of any part of the full spectrum of reproductive health care. In many countries where denial of care is allowed in the law, there is doctors must refer, but we don't believe that is enough. It is anybody's personal right to not agree with anything. But if you do not agree with abortion care, then you do not become a gynecologist. It's as simple as that. Can't opt out of one piece of healthcare if you choose to enter that profession. That's how Sweden and certain other countries do it, and that's the way it should be. Governments or health authorities need to provide accurate information about abortion, and they need to be actively, proactively countering the disinformation that is out there. And finally, we would say, because this was a very complex, as Neil said, it took about 18 months, and it's so nuanced, all these different aspects that impact abortion. So we do think there's room to conduct additional research on key barriers, like how stigma affects women accessing abortion, geographical discrepancies. It's very hard to score a country on access because they might have access on paper, but it might be all in the urban areas, and rural women might find it very difficult. The cost, again, yes, might even be covered by national insurance, but as I said, other things might cost. Refusal of care. In other countries, Italy is very well studied, Croatia is quite well studied, but we know it's very broad. The burden of travel, how that affects women. So those are our recommendations. I think that's it. One more slide. Yes, I would just like to thank everybody that was involved. It was a huge project. The expert group were absolutely marvelous, and we spent so many phone calls and discussions and thinking and working things out. The national partners who provided all of the information and all the staff who worked on it. I just want to pick out one person because I think she's an absolute example of grace under pressure, and that's Marina. I'm not going to pronounce your name properly, Marina Davishvili, and who kept this all together and kept the team together and never got flustered, and is responsible for the Atlas and for this great work. So thank you to Marina, thank you to the expert group, thank you to everybody also on my team, and now I am going to hand over the mic to the next speaker.
Okay, Caroline, thank you very much for that. And Neil, this has been indeed very, very interesting. I think this is going to be a trove of information for policymakers. Of course, there are some policymakers who will not be influenced by facts, unfortunately. And I do believe that it's very important that we are alert. Because I think the backlash against advancing women's rights or progress in women's rights is very strong. My country, fortunately, scores very well in your atlas, but we also found 2 weeks ago that a current junior minister of the caretaker government, who belongs to a kind of a Christian fundamentalist party, has been giving illegal subsidies to an anti-choice organization, millions of subsidies, even against the advice of his civil servants. So even in a country which has a very good reputation when it comes to abortion services, there is a backlash, and it's not very loud. It's not as if people take to the street protesting against abortion. They're using other channels, and I find that extremely, extremely disconcerting. And I think I will also always have difficulty understanding how these people can consider that women are competent and intelligent enough to decide to have children and to raise those children, but they're not competent and intelligent enough to decide that they do not want to have children, or they do not want to have a particular pregnancy. Okay, I believe we're now going to the animation, and after that we are going to have the presentations by two more experts. But first, the animation. Okay, thank you for the animation. Then now we're going to listen to the testimonies of two experts. First, we'll listen to, and you see her already on our screen, Dr. Antonella Lavlanet. I hope I pronounced this correctly, from the World Health Organization, Department of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research, where she's a medical officer. She is a board certified obstetrician gynecologist, complex family planning specialist, but Mrs. Lavlanet is also a lawyer, a public health professional, and a policy specialist experienced in health policy implementation at international level. So we're very, very pleased to have you with us, and I'll give you the floor now for your presentation.
Great, thank you so much. If I could just ask for the presentation to be shown. Great, thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to participate today. I feel very privileged and excited to be here with you. And I'm here to speak to you about the work of WHO, but also I'd like to discuss the potential intersections with the European Policies Atlas. As many of you know, WHO is a norms and standards setting agency, and we have several guidelines that speak to the provision of comprehensive abortion services, including contraception by various healthcare workers. Next slide, please. As you know, this is a public health challenge with approximately 73.3 million abortions happening each year. 61% of unintended pregnancies are ending in abortion. Next slide, please. If we hone in on the European region, these estimates become 5.9 million unintended pregnancies, with 56% ending in abortion. And that's an average across the region. Next slide, please. And as we know, these are human rights issues as well, specifically discrimination, stigma, which Carolyn spoke about, lack of respect for the confidentiality of patients. All of these things may deter women, girls, and pregnant individuals from seeking advice and treatment, which thereby adversely affects their health and well-being. This is magnified by inequity and inequality in access to safe legal abortion, but also to information and other needed resources. Next slide, please. Thus, in order to meet individual sexual and reproductive health and rights needs, ideally, abortion services should be integrated into the health system, either as public health services or through publicly funded nonprofit services to acknowledge their status as legitimate health services, and to protect against stigmatization and discrimination of individuals and healthcare providers. Individuals must have access to information and counseling where desired, and access to all services without delay. Again, many of the things Carolyn spoke about earlier. Healthcare providers have a role in assisting individuals to understand their rights and sexual and reproductive health options, to help them determine how to go about achieving their aspirations, and to empower them for those in particular who are self-managing. Health workers at healthcare facilities should respect and support individuals they interact with without judgment or stigma, and consider any particular needs like those of adolescents or where language or immigration status may be an issue, just to name a few. Next slide, please. WHO specifically works with states to consider the ways in which services are structured and accessed. So here are some of the components we ask states to consider when they are establishing service provision. Many of these come through in the policies captured in the European Atlas. So just to highlight a few, training and equipping, pre-service and in-service training is also needed. Space for individuals to appreciate their professional responsibilities and how those align or don't align with their personal views. And also, we must consider who it is we train. As mentioned, we have a guideline that speaks specifically to expanding who can provide services and also addresses the individual in the role of self-management. When we consider financing and costs, this includes reproductive health technologies, appropriate allocations for staff time, and ensuring that sexual and reproductive health services, including contraception, are never to be denied or delayed due to a person's inability to pay. Monitoring and quality assurance means not only collecting service statistics, but also doing case reviews, direct observation, and interviews with service providers and users, with the goals of ensuring that service provision aligns with standards and guidelines, and services respond to the needs of users and providers. This promotes system readiness and responsiveness. Next slide, please. However, when WHO creates its guidance, it does more than provide regimens of care. We highlight that in addition to evidence-based practices, health systems should function in ways that respect and protect human rights, including the rights to life, liberty, autonomy, and security of the person, the rights to equality and non-discrimination, and the right to privacy. Next slide, please. This also includes the right to the highest attainable standard of health. Here is WHO's definition of health, and this definition also applies to sexual and reproductive health. While all member states accept this definition of health, many countries' laws do not refer to either the WHO definition or reference explicitly all the component parts of health. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the right to health includes both freedoms and entitlements. Freedoms to control, if you could go back, please. Thank you. Freedom to control one's health and body and to be free from interference. And entitlements include the right to a system of health protection so that everyone can enjoy equal opportunity to the highest attainable level of health. Next slide, please. When we speak of reproductive rights, specifically, we're speaking of the right of couples and individuals to access information, have the means to decide freely and responsibly the number, spacing, and timing of children, the right to consensual partnership, and the right to benefit from scientific progress. So how do we deliver on this? Sexual and reproductive health services, in particular abortion services, that are evidence-based and protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. Next slide, please. Firstly, we're currently working on an update to the Safe Abortion Guideline. And I'd like to inform you also that we're collapsing all of our abortion guidelines into one. Next slide, please. And we also know that policies and practices that reduce barriers to safe abortion help individuals around the world avoid the dangerous or even fatal consequences of unsafe abortion. The European Abortion Policies Atlas can thus help facilitate greater understanding of the law and policy landscape. The Atlas doesn't just provide information about legal texts. It seeks to go one step further and provide insights into how these laws are interpreted or applied in society. It is with greater understanding that interventions can be made. Next slide, please. From our perspective, these legal and policy interventions, even at the facility level, should also be based on evidence with human rights integration. These are some of the potential barriers that have previously been identified in our 2012 Safe Abortion Guideline as they relate to abortion care. And these are addressed in the Atlas as well. Next slide, please. As mentioned with the update, we're specifically evaluating the health and non-health impacts of these barriers. All those circled in red, including 3 additional topics: grounds, gestational limits, and criminalization, and the potential for a negative relationship with rights enjoyment between these interventions and various outcomes. Potential impacts we've identified include, for example, some of which, by the way, have been mentioned by Caroline earlier, including opportunity costs, system costs, delay, disproportionate impact, unlawful abortion, and even things like anticipated family disharmony, anticipated exposure to interpersonal violence, anticipated reproductive coercion. We hope that with this information, policymakers, including here in Europe, will be able to be armed with the information they need to make the necessary changes as appropriate. And again, in complement with the information from the findings from the Atlas. Next slide, please. This work is also, of course, linked to our Global Abortion Policies database, which includes the country abortion laws and policies for all UN member states, as was mentioned earlier. And this information is juxtaposed to relevant WHO guidance, signed human rights treaties, and all concluding observations related to abortion, among other information. We are currently undertaking a systematic review of the database, updating all countries. And we're also working to expand the database to include implementation, as the information in the database currently only speaks to what is written in the text of the law. Next slide, please. Thus, we are eager to continue working with colleagues here to ensure that all of our information is also up to date and to provide the necessary support to countries so that they may adequately be armed with information about the abortion context within their settings. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lavlanet. Then our last speaker this morning, or before we go to the Q&A, is Dr. Elisabetta Canitano from Italy, who is a gynecologist and also the president of the association Vita di Donna, a gynecologist and feminist activist for the defense of women's rights. So I see her on my screen. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to give you the floor straight away.
Good morning. I'll read for you my, I prepared. Italy is notoriously one of the countries in which abortion is allowed and regulated, but in which the possibility of accessing abortion is insufficient. To understand exactly what is happening, first of all, we have to remember that the parties that had written the law 194 on access to abortion were the Christian Democratic Party, heavily influenced by the Vatican, and the Communist Party, which defended a pro-choice stand. The Communist Party is now the Democratic Party. Despite it is officially in favor of the law, is not doing enough to ensure the application of the law in practice, especially in the Center-South and in Lombardy. It has tolerated that reproductive health and women's health depend on religiously affiliated health providers. Maternity wards in public hospitals, which are supposed to be secular, are being deprived of funding and neglected, while privatized Catholic hospitals grow in number and size. They use aggressive advertisement to offer their medicalized and often not free obstetric assistance. Doctors of affiliated religious structures first do not only refuse to provide abortion care, but also often lead a daily war on contraception, following the Catholic doctrine that considers contraception a mortal sin, as sexuality must be directed towards procreation. In addition to this, we see that Italian religious organizations involved in healthcare are also able to control the direction of maternity wards in public state hospitals, hampering the implementation of the law. Therefore, the large number of doctors invoking denial of care in Italy include a very large number of healthcare professionals in public hospitals. Anti-choice organizations such as Communion and Liberation, the Vatican, the Opus Dei, control the direction of states' public hospitals, maternity wards, and stop in practice to implementation of the law that allow women's rights to choose to prevail over the right of the embryo. Yes, because the central point is this. Religiously affiliated organizations in Italy fight to recognize the embryo and the fetus as legal persons with the same rights of the women. So for this organization, the women should not have a choice, neither in the first 12 weeks and 5 days, 90 days, nor in case of fetal malformation beyond 90 days. Choice shouldn't be a possibility for this, not even when the woman's life is in danger, as it was in the case of Valentina Muzzo, who died of sepsis like Savita Palanavar in Ireland. Both died during a miscarriage because abortion was denied even when their life was obviously in serious danger. But Valentina died in a country that allowed abortion for 40 years. Maternity wards in hospitals and clinics run by religiously affiliated organizations transfer these women to public maternity wards or discharge them so that complications take place at home in order for other healthcare providers to intervene when the woman is in danger life. The woman is put on equal footing with the fetus or 17 or 20 weeks or other, and if she is not dying, in their views, should not be allowed to eliminate the fetus. Recent news is the victory of the referendum in San Marino, where abortion was allowed only in case of serious danger for the women. Serious danger. That is when you are about to die. We are even witnessing debates among priests challenging whether it should be allowed to treat an ectopic pregnancy before hemorrhage, or whether it is legitimate to use methotrexate in case of ectopic pregnancy to save the woman's life and preserve her tube with a much less invasive intervention. Unfortunately, the progressive definancing of public hospitals makes these debates a real risk for women's life and the health rather than a liturgical fantasy, as it should be. To resume my initial point on the responsibility of politics and politicians, we must remember that in Italy we had Beatrice Lorenzin as Minister of Health for 5 years and 3 governments. The government of Berlusconi, the one dominated by Salvini, and the one of Matteo Renzi for the Democratic Party. She is a well-known anti-choice person. She participates at the convention of the association One of Us. Now she is the health manager of the Democratic Party, former Communist Party, which should be defending women's right to choose. To make the situation worse for women, access to modern contraception is not covered by health insurance. It should also be remembered that except for 2 regions with a secular history, such as Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, Contraception is entirely paid out of the pocket by women, and even where it is free, it is only for young women until the age of 25. Religiously affiliated structures and their doctor fight contraception as a mortal sin and have clinics that advertise natural contraception. They insist that the pill be prescribed only after genetic tests for thrombophilia, demonizing the risk of venous thrombosis, and declare the IUD a means of abortion provided for religion. The result is that intrauterine devices are very little widespread in Italy, as well as boycott the insertion of therapeutic IUDs, even in case of disease. The Catholic Medical School prefer, hysterectomy, the removal of the uterus, than IUD insertion, which is a much less intrusive and dangerous operation for women. Our health ministers reports on the implementation of the abortion law 194 always say there are enough doctors for the required abortions. They get away with this because Italian women are aware that voluntary abortion is their right. And they will do anything to get it by traveling within the country or abroad. But the state is not helping them, providing referral or clear information about the path to get an abortion. They are abandoned and depend on the service and care of women's rights NGOs like Mine Vita di Donna or LAIGA, the gynecologist for the choice, Obiezione Respinta, and I had an abortion and I'm doing very well, thank you, is an association. Unfortunately, women in Italy think they have a right to reproductive health and they have no idea before they need abortion care of the exposure to risk and false information that religious health institutions exposes them to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Canitano. In a way, it's very disconcerting because I remember we've had the talks about the situation in Italy already 10, 15 years ago, and it sounds to me that very little has changed. In particular, the fact that there is such a gap between the legislation and the practice, and in particular, the right to conscientious objection, which is basically being abused to, on a very large scale, deny women their legal right to abortion. Okay, I can see that there are several questions in the chat, which are being answered by the team, but I think we can also introduce them into the debate, and I'm going to ask all four speakers, so Neil Datta, Caroline Hickson, Antonella Lavlanet, and Elisabetta Canitano, to participate in the debate. We have about half an hour. I saw two questions. One was whether the Atlas has taken account of the reduced access to abortion services under COVID. And the second one was if, where is my, here, if the Atlas also takes into account access to abortion for undocumented women or women who have no access to healthcare. I don't know who would like to answer that question. Maybe I'll start with Caroline Hickson.
Okay, so on the first one, I mean, obviously it was a work in progress as COVID was happening. So what was certainly able to be measured were those changes which were brought in as a result of COVID. in terms of the provision of medical abortion. For example, telemedicine. I think that was where we were able to measure it. In terms of disruptions, I think possibly we went with the kind of more permanent statistics as opposed to what was happening because of COVID. And on the second one, does the Atlas take into account for undocumented women? I think I might throw that one back to Marina if she's there. Because that's quite complex.
I can take that one.
Oh yeah, Neil, sorry, yes, of course you're there.
That's okay, Caroline. Yeah, in relation to undocumented women, yes, we did take a look specifically at the laws and policies and who and what they specified in terms of who was eligible. So in some countries, it may be only citizens or residents and citizens, or etc. And so we did take that into account. And so this is reflected in the access category. And so I think when you have a chance to take a look more in detail at the sub-criteria, you'll find that you'll be able to find that for yourself.
Okay, I see there are more questions coming in here. Is there any country with no time limit at all to get an abortion? And a question that I would like to throw in myself is women who, certainly within the European Union, who do not have access to a safe and legal abortion in their own country, tend to travel to other countries. Have you mapped that out? Can you see what movements there are? I mean, in normal times, but also in times of COVID. Neil, would you start?
Yes, in terms of, is there any country with no time limit to get an abortion? I think that's, we need to specify what we mean by this. So in terms of women electing to have an abortion, there are time limits, so that it goes up until 22, 24 weeks, depending on the countries, and that's that. At the same time, if a woman's life or health is in danger, even beyond that, there is access to abortion in almost every country where the limit is not taken into account. So I think one has to be clear what one means by abortion and time limits. And then secondly, in terms of traveling, this is unfortunately one of the limitations of this report, or of this atlas, where we could not take that into account. But of course, it's something that we know exists, and we know that there's other research projects which are looking more in detail about this, about restrictive countries and women who live in countries with restrictive legislation. Where do they travel? And then also, interestingly, women who live in countries with so-called progressive laws, they also have to travel. So you find French women traveling to neighboring countries having to access abortion. So we know this is happening, but it's very difficult to capture, except for anecdotes here and there. But I think maybe Caroline can add on this.
Well, I was just going to add, because this is very relevant to Ireland, because obviously Ireland has got a lot of kudos for our abortion reform. But in fact, because there is no abortion for fetal malformation, and even for fatal fetal abnormality, there are very strict rules as to what might constitute fatal fetal abnormality. And so you're still having a lot of women traveling to the UK in the very worst circumstances, which is precisely one of the things that this referendum wanted to prevent. Yeah, so I think the mapping is extremely interesting. I know there was a study in the University of Barcelona. Silvia de Zordo was the academic, and I know they've had some very interesting findings in terms of traveling and exactly that sort of mapping. Yeah, I think we could find that information and possibly put it in the chat in terms of where that study's at. I'm not sure if it's finished yet, though. But it's a really, really pertinent question for Europe, and one of the things that needs more study.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if Dr. Canitano, Dr. Lavlanet want to answer to any of these questions in the meantime? There are other questions as well coming in.
I'm happy to come in on the question
Yes,
about socioeconomic grounds. So, and I don't know if Neil will want to expand as well, but there are several countries that, broadly speak of social economic grounds without descriptors for what that would mean necessarily. And so that does obviously imply an interpretive context. So it does require the person assessing the eligibility to determine whether or not the individual meets the criteria. There are other countries, though, that consider things like living conditions, for example, as a factor that could be considered when determining whether or not an individual is eligible, legally eligible for abortions. So it's not necessarily the situation where there's some sort of composite list that falls underneath the social or economic ground. Over.
Okay, thank you. There are more and more questions coming in now. Also about, there's the reference to the study that was just mentioned by Caroline Hickson. You can find it in the chat. And there's another question about underage girls. And I would like to address the question about women traveling to other countries, or maybe resorting even to other abortion services, or even to illegal abortions. I don't know what, if that still exists in Europe, or if the fact that we have an internal market enables women to choose for a safe abortion, but in another country. I don't know if Dr. Canitano wants to say anything about the kind of solutions that Italian women choose, or if they just carry the baby to term because they have no other option. Can you say something about that?
I hope I understood the question. We need a central organization about the abortion. We need, I don't know if the Italian public health can do or will do this solution, because we have 21 regions and 21 health systems, and each one do without regulation by the central health minister. And if you go in Sicily, you have a really big problem with the young girl, for example. And in Lazio, we have a big problem about the prenatal diagnosis. It's a big problem for us because the Catholic Church control also prenatal diagnosis. And we will need central decision and action for our government. But for the, there is two problems. One problem is the Catholic Church, and other problem is the privatization of national health, which grow and grow and grow. And less you control, more you can privatize. And we hope, but we do this by organization NGO. Liga did the Italian hospital for who do abortion, Vita di Donna answer to the women who ask, where can I do an abortion? But the central health system in Italy don't do nothing about this.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back to Italy because I think it's a very good example, or a bad example rather. But there are more and more questions coming into the chat. One is a question to the authors about underage girls and parental consent, whether that has been mapped. It is also pointed out in the chat that not all women have the possibility to travel to another country if they cannot get an abortion in their own country. There is also a post by Jordi Baroja, I hope I get this right, saying he's from the Catalonian Sexual and Reproductive Health Organization, and they find that anti-abortion groups are very active in spreading the wrong information or anti-choice information. And this ties in with what I said earlier about the Dutch minister who very secretly was funding anti-choice organizations who presented themselves as a kind of counseling services for women. Okay, some of the questions have disappeared. Okay. Maybe another question from me to the authors of the report about the compulsory counseling and the compulsory waiting period. Has there been done any research to find out whether that actually dissuades women from having an abortion? Because I don't think it does, quite frankly. I mean, if a woman has made up her mind, then she will not be dissuaded by counseling or by the wait. And if a woman isn't certain, if she's still hesitating, then she will still make her own decision to maybe not have an abortion. But does anybody know whether this compulsory counseling and compulsory wait, if that has in any way reduced the number of abortions by dissuading women from having them? So that would be my question. There was the question about underage girls and the question about fake information being spread. So who would like to come in? Neil?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sophie. In terms of disinformation, maybe we'll just go back to one area that I know quite well, which is what the anti-gender, the anti-choice groups, what they do. And it was back in 2017, some of these anti-choice groups met in the very European Parliament in an organization called the Political Network of Values. And they made a presentation there where they were outlining what they want to do in terms of a whole range of issues, including abortion. And they articulated their strategy. Their strategy in relation to abortion is prevent, restrict, prohibit. Now, we're familiar with the prohibit one. That's what we're seeing in Poland. We're familiar with the restrict one. That's what we see appearing in countries every now and then. If you remember Spain back in 2013 and 14, a draconian law was being presented there aiming to restrict. We know less well about what these groups do to prevent. And this is one of their main areas of action. In terms of preventing, there's conscientious objection / denial of care. That's one area. Another one is a whole range of disinformation, which they have always engaged in, but now with the advent of the internet, they're able to really go full steam ahead in providing disinformation. Another area that they're able to do is also provide call centers where they, in France, for example, if you type in IVG, which is the French word for abortion, the first site that you'll get on Google is a fake website with a green number, which looks like a legitimate government-sponsored telephone number. You call that and you reach some random woman in her basement who will tell you bad things about abortion. And then you have the full-blown crisis pregnancy counseling centers, which is what Sophie mentioned earlier in the introduction, which are fake centers which dissuade or delay women from accessing abortion. And in the Netherlands, this group is called CIRIS, but you have these types of groups in the Netherlands, Spain, very well developed in Italy, Slovakia, and in a number of different places. As to whether, going back to Sophie's question, as to whether these mandatory waiting periods or counseling sessions actually have an impact on the women, as far as I've seen, I haven't seen any data that shows that it does have an impact. Rather, these are archaic features of the law, which date to when a certain social consensus needed to be found in order to proceed with legalizing abortion, so that abortion would be available on health grounds, not women's rights, health grounds. This is what was the case in many countries in Europe in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So it became available, but then it became available with a range of restrictions. So lower gestational limits for European laws compared to the US law, which doesn't have one. And then also you make women jump through a number of hoops or obstacles so that they have it, but you instill in them the notion that it's a bad thing what they're doing. And so it's a way of stigmatizing the whole procedure and the women going through it. And we have these archaic features which remain in the laws today in a good number of countries, but there's a certain number of countries which have eliminated these, so that France, Belgium have eliminated the notion that women are in distress when they need to access abortion, so that, but in a number of countries, they still exist.
I was just going to come back on the one about the minors. So all countries except Estonia, France, Sweden, and Switzerland require parental consent. But Turkey also requires spousal consent. So, yeah. So that's another level altogether. Yeah.
Can I come in for a second?
Yes, I'm just trying to recover from this spousal consent. Bloody hell. Yes, please do come in.
So just a couple of comments. So in addition to spousal consent, I mean, there are countries, for example, that have different or additional types of authorizations. So for example, additional providers or committees, for example, are required, in particular, that kick in after a certain point. So often after a gestational limit has been met, or if there's a specific indication, panels of specialists. So that exists as well. So, third-party authorization comes in many forms. So we need to just be mindful of that. In terms of the mandatory waiting periods and the counseling, just to remind again that is one of the areas that we are focusing on in terms of the update and to look at the impacts. Many of the studies have been done in the US context because the waiting periods are, change depending on the state that you're in, really. And then in terms of, I just want to comment on the coverage issue because I've seen a couple of questions come in about the coverage, the healthcare coverage. It's important to note that not all countries cover all abortions for all people. Some countries cover all abortions for some people, meaning minors or residents, for example. Some countries cover for specific indications. Some countries cover for just post-abortion care, but that's actually not the European context. So we just need to also be clear that there's many categories of coverage, and so that's not necessarily holistically applied. Over.
Thanks. Before we go to the next question in the chat, I would just like to come back to Neil because you mentioned this was the case of where Google, if you Google IVG in France, that the first thing Google presents. We've had this case in Poland as well, but there it was actually, we suspected that it was at the request of the government or even paid for by the government or something like that. And of course, Google says, oh, no, we would never. So I wasn't aware of the French case, but that might actually merit another parliamentary question if you have more information about this.
Yes, yes. I mean, the French case is not new. It's been around for quite a number of years. And again, when there were questions raised about this, Google said, no, it's not our fault. It's algorithms and whatever. But the French authorities have taken action. So that there's a good story there to tell, where the French authorities are aware of this problem, and they have tried to take action, and they've adopted measures which are aimed to combat disinformation in relation to access to abortion care. Whether it's successful or not, that's a separate debate, because how it is you can regulate information on the internet is a whole different thing. But at least the public authorities have tried to do something.
Okay, well, that's very good to hear. Let's see. Oops.
Can I add something there while you're scrolling through the chat?
Yes, please do. Please take the floor.
Caroline has mentioned Ireland a couple of times, and I think they're also a very good example of the management of misinformation. Early, especially in particular at the start of their implementation in January of 2019, they actively managed information provision, and also, dealt with sort of this idea about Google and their algorithms. So it does require active processing and making sure you're putting out information that sort of makes it to the top of the search if you're talking about Google. And then in terms of countries, it's also important to remember that it's not just abortion information and the laws and rules about abortion information. Here's an area where there's intersection with many other laws, right? So just information provision in general, health management information, internet information, sort of e-health generally. So there's laws that govern all of these things, and there are intersections there for the abortion context. So where there's one change, it could have a ripple effect, but it does require coordination across multiple sectors.
I think the media have also been helpful in Ireland, because they've really outed sources of misinformation. For example, shortly after abortion care came in, they had an American organization who was actually training volunteers in Ireland to stand outside centers or hospitals that provided abortion, giving women misinformation. And actually there was an investigative journalism report, and they went in and they found out what happened, and it was all over the newspapers, because so often people just don't know what's going on. And I think the type of work that Neil and EPF does on opposition is incredibly important, and then actually managing to amplify that and get it into people's hands so that they understand what's happening is really important. And that's where partnerships with the media as well are really, really vital.
Yeah. Can I ask, because we are, we still have a few minutes left, could I ask Dr. Cannitano, to come back to the situation in Italy? Do you feel that the situation, that there is any kind of improvement? Do you feel, you mentioned very specifically the fact that across the political spectrum, parties, left-wing parties, right-wing parties, centrist parties have actually done preciously little to improve the situation. Is there no massive protest by women? Because women in Italy, like anywhere else in the world, at some point they're going to need an abortion. Many women do. It's not unique for one country or another. And as I said, I've already heard many years ago the fact that the conscientious objection is being used as a pretext for a kind of quasi blanket ban on abortion in Italy. There were regions where 80% of doctors would refuse to carry out an abortion, which would mean that the remaining 20% had to carry out all the abortions in the region. And at some point they also said, look, I didn't become a doctor to only do abortions the whole day. So, but is there any improvement? And can you say, this is my second question, something about the provision of information in Italy? Is that an issue?
The situation is really difficult to improve, because the women, yes, they go and ask for better services about abortion. But the money go to the religious structures. And you can cry and you can say what you want, but the money go to the religious health system. And they are untouched for the Italian politics. Also the school, we have this problem about the church. We have this problem also about sexual education, because the religious Italian people at the church want we do the sexual education in the school. And also the money for this intervention in the school go to the MOIGE. The MOIGE is Vatican's organization who go in the school and is not also anti-abortion, anti-contraception, but also homophobe. And we have the public system like only a title and subtitle, but in the middle and in the center of the our organization, we have the church. And this is a silent occupation about this, because the church for the people is good for health. They have the best hospital. And we have one hospital in Sardinia with Italian states and Vatican's and also Arabian state. And this, I know it's incredible, but it's true. And we fight for abortion, and maybe sometime Democratic Party said, yeah, okay, I agree, poor women, but the money go every time to the church. And we try to say and protect the women about also using the internet. I received the call for the women who said, I'm in a Catholic hospital. I'm in 17 weeks. I have rupture of amniotic sac. How can I save me? And we ask for these women, go away now for the Catholic hospital. But it's not so easy. Thank you.
Well, that's quite heavy. Okay. Oops. Let's take a last general question. We have 1 minute left, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, the last question is to the authors of the report, if they can give some more details of the findings regarding Spain in particular. Okay, there are many more questions which I believe are going to be answered in writing, but I'll ask this last question to Neil and Caroline, and then we are going to wrap up. Yeah,
I see that there's a few country-specific questions from Bulgaria, Spain, and the United Kingdom. To be honest, I don't have the information off the top of my head at the moment. So I suggest that those who have those specific questions, they can contact us. We've provided the contact details in the presentation, and they know how to reach us. And we'll get back to them with the more detailed answers about what we have found for each country.
Okay, thank you. I think the remarks about Bulgaria and Romania and the UK were more of an informative nature rather than a direct question. But I think the team is going to take care of those questions. I hope that when we are going to log off in a few minutes, that the questions will not just disappear. But in any case, as you said, the contact details have already been posted. Maybe, I don't know who's in charge of the slides. You can put the contact details up for 1 more minute in case people have missed it. I don't know if that's possible. Okay, I'll just keep talking in the meantime. No, I would really, we've come to the end of this session and it went very, very quickly. Although I've been dealing with these issues for many, many years, I'm still shocked and horrified and angry every single time. And I think we see a lot of developments around the world. I mentioned China, Texas was mentioned, and there seem to be other American states considering to do the same. We see in the European Union, of course, Poland is leading the way back into the Stone Age, but there are other governments, not countries, but governments who seem to be willing to follow that same path. We mentioned the so-called family summit earlier on. So I think we have to be on high alert, even in the countries where things are going well, because I do believe, yes, thank you, Remy. I do believe that, you know, once we have achieved a very favorable situation, that will not be attacked and challenged. So even in countries where things are going well, we can see that sometimes there's a change in attitude and a change in political climate. And it is very important that we keep this up. And I think that the COVID, this past year and a half of the COVID pandemic have also shown us how important it is that these services are accessible, and that women who are, you know, who are pregnant and they want to terminate their pregnancy, that there are no unnecessary hurdles. Okay, I would like to thank everybody very much, of course, in particular, Neil Datta and Caroline Hickson, and all those who've been authoring the report. And we're looking forward to the annual reports, because I imagine there will be annual reports, or at least regular reports from now on, to see if things improve and if the whole of Europe is going to be green. And then I would like to extend a specific thank you to Dr. Antonella Lavlanet and Dr. Elisabetta Canitano for your insights and your expertise, and also for your commitment. And I would like to thank everybody who's out there for joining this session. And this is it for today. Thank you all very much, and we will be following very, very closely.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.